Welcome everyone to the LGBTQ Institute's annual business forum. Today we're going to be discussing now what? Post-election forecast. So I hope you're in for a good conversation. I first wanted to specifically thank Delta Airlines, who is our founding sponsor, who provides the support for these conversations. We've had some really in-depth conversations recently. And if you haven't been able to catch those, you can go to lgbtqbusinessforum.org and take a look at those recorded webinars. We also want to thank our community partner, Out Georgia Business Alliance. They have been great in terms of promoting the event as well. And I would like to introduce you to our panelist, Andre Banks, founder and CEO of AB Partners. Thank you, Andre, for being here. Appreciate that. We also have Lisa Cunningham, digital storyteller. Lisa, thank you for being here today. And we have Bob Wittick, president of Wittick Communications Incorporated. Thank you, Bob, for being here. First, what I wanted to do was just allow you all the opportunity to share briefly a little bit more about the work that you do. And Lisa, would you like to start just to tell a little bit more about the work that you do within the LGBTQ and business space?
Sure. Well, I am in the epicenter right now, it feels like, right? I'm here in Atlanta, Georgia. Proud to be here as we finally have turned this state blue here and been excited. Over the past few years, I have had the absolute honor to serve our mayor on our inaugural LGBTQ advisory board. We've always gotten high marks here in Atlanta, but you know, we've got to move our mission forward, and I think our board is on task to continue to make a difference for the next couple of years as we embark at the end of her term, and then hopefully and happily beyond that. So that's one role that I have that I hold dear to my heart. And by profession, I'm a director and a producer. And I live a lot in the digital space, which has become more important than ever right now. The stories that we see primarily are on our smartphones. And I'm able to share those stories through branded content with corporate partners and nonprofits. And for me, that's once again been a sweet spot because we have had I'm so tired of using the word unprecedented because I cannot wait for us to get to some precedented time. And so I got the chance to work with the Black Women's Health Imperative, which is the nation's largest and oldest organization for Black women's health in this country. And I've been able to partner with them on all sorts of things that have to do with, these issues, LGBTQ rights, Black lives, all of it. So I've been in a good space during this time. And fortunately, I've been busier than ever, where I know that my brothers and sisters in my film industry have not fared as well. And so I'm just excited to be here today to talk a little bit about this ever-changing landscape.
Bob, do you want to go next?
I'd be happy to. I was going to say, hearing Lisa's excitement and enthusiasm reminds us of the hope we have coming. I think in 2021, this has been a hard year for all of us. And we set our sights very, very high for the election. And, even the moment we're gathering today, the election's not over. It's not over. Well, it's over in many meaningful ways, but we have races in Georgia now that are so historic and crucial. In the past 27 years, as you probably know, Ryan, I've been working with major corporations in the United States on their LGBTQ business strategies. What I've been trying to do is help give them the rewarding business imperatives about getting it right, their policies, their practices, their messages. And I think today, beyond just paying attention to their own world, is paying attention to the entire world and saying that we have a stake in the outcomes of public policy so that they do more, as they're doing in Georgia, they're doing around the country. getting involved in litigation, in public policy briefs, um, getting behind the Equality Act, trying to enact federal legislation. And in, the last 5 years at least, or longer maybe, playing defense, blocking bad things that happen. And business, for 3 decades, I've felt that business are our natural allies. They witness in our lives that we are part of the solution and not part of the problem. We are the change agents in their midst who give them energy in intellect and in terms of understanding how to be good allies in a progressive movement. They should be in that space. We should tell and use their voice and also support their voice when they do that. When they go off base, we should be critical. We can't be uncritical of things that go wrong. But at the same time, I think a lot of the change in politics in America has been because private sector engagement has given us some moral platforms that we lack. Certainly we lack in Washington, D.C. today, and we need to revisit. So that's the kind of work I love to do, and it's what I'm trying to do.
Thank you, Bob. Andre?
Sure. Glad to be in this good company. Happy to be with these wonderful folks from Georgia as well. Everybody in the world is talking about you guys. As I was saying, when we were getting ready, my inbox is full of questions about Georgia. So that's all good news. So I have a couple of hats that I wear now. I'm the founder of a company called AB Partners, which is based in New York, where we have sort of a team all over the country that is really a storytelling studio. So we work with people to craft stories about people, power, and social change across a wide range of issues. And a part of that work this year has been launching a project called Win Black Palante, which was focused on combating misinformation that was targeting Black and Latinx voters across the country. So we put together a network which included about 100 grassroots organizations in ultimately about 21 states who we worked closely with. And we produced tons of content, digital content, to help people understand how to vote, to be inspired about why they should vote, and to make sure that we were combating some of the worst information. And so luckily had a lot of fun working very closely with a number of groups in Georgia who delivered such a huge victory, as well as groups in Florida and some others in the region. So very glad to be here to talk to you all about all what comes next now that we've turned the corner.
Absolutely. Well, I guess one of my first questions is, what do you think this election says to business leaders? I think that's to anybody. What do you think that if you're a business leader, let's say of a fairly large size company, maybe one of the Fortune 1000 or Fortune 500, what do you think this election says to you?
I'm happy to jump. I'll take that bait. I think one thing that it says, just if you look at the enormous growth in turnout, I mean, this is the biggest election for 150 years, I think they said. I mean, just a huge percentage of Americans showing up at the polls to vote. I think, if you're sitting in a company right now looking at that landscape, it's really hard to think of oneself as being apolitical. It's really hard to sort of picture that you're operating in a world where people aren't deeply engaged in politics. It's more and more we sort of find ourselves in the middle of these conversations. And I think especially with things like coronavirus, the sort of huge movement for racial justice, we've been so personally touched and moved and engaged in politics this year that I think the one thing that I think would feel different from a perspective of a company is really knowing that this is where your customers are at. This is what your customers are talking about. This is what they're worried about and concerned about. And so I think that growth and sort of attention to issues among kind of consumers has been growing, but I think we're really seeing an interesting peak.
I would say I want to add Andre and Lisa are examples of how much the digital warriors made a difference this cycle. We couldn't do the knocking on doors, couldn't do the face-to-face visits with voters. Joe came into the campaign physically very late. I mean, for us, it was scary. I think Democrats felt very anxious believing that he could not touch the flesh. He couldn't see people in the same way that we've often felt candidates must. But the digital warriors that you have here today are an example of how change agents look. And also they're able to reach into populations that have been underserved or under connected or disconnected or alienated. And so I think that we're going to see a witness some populations, of course, vibrant and alive based on that connection. And also younger generations who are used to being connected electronically and digitally. Not my generation, they wouldn't have had that experience and that didn't matter. But I have to say, if you're going to reach younger generations, that's where the habit of voting, the habit of being engaged has to begin.
Well, go ahead, Lisa, sorry.
Bounce off of that a little bit more too, because what I saw, and I was so remiss in my intro, is that I didn't also mention that I was on the Creative Council for Stacey Abrams' Fair Fight Action. And one thing that I was able to do that I was extremely proud of, Gabrielle Union is a client, and through her, I got her to do a cool call with Stacey Abrams, right? But I think that the sweet spot is that instead of, it was an exchange of information back and forth. See, in the past, I think a lot of times celebrities just, vote or die, or, rock the vote. And it's so like this whole metaphorical thing. I think this was really the first time that we ever had a plan and said, no, we got to arm these people. We got to arm our brothers and sisters with information so that they can share it. And we have to do it in a way that it can be viral. And so that I really thank you, Bob, for recognizing the power in all of that, because it does reach, for me, I was thinking about, the women who are typically in the beauty salons and that sort of thing. Gabrielle Union speaks to those people, right? And so these are gals that don't get a lot of political information from a lot of sources. And so we could go on and on. I know Andre could go on and on about this, but I think that, yes, that's what makes me energized and excited for the future. And then to answer your question about the businesses, we do have to look at this changing landscape. Mm-hmm. We have to look at the fact that these millennials, and just by sheer volume of how many of them, I'm Generation X, but the millennials, with how many, with them being the largest demographic now, and kind of what their mindset is. So if you have like somewhere, I heard like something like 67% of the young adults in the country do not believe that you should be able to refuse service to LGBTQ people in your businesses, right? So if you've got, that's the next wave of folks coming, then you got to pay attention, because these are people that, they're going to be able to support or not support your businesses. So I think we're in a very interesting space with regards to, how this thing can play out for the future. And businesses really need to take a look at the millennials, because they may hit them with a whammy.
Well, and to that point, Lisa, I wanted to ask, because you are a storyteller, what story should companies be telling now?
I am so excited to be involved in a partnership with a company, Ed Farm, and you'll hear a lot about it. They're partnered with Apple, okay? And they are about to have a tech incubator hub in Atlanta as a support to HBCUs here, okay? So right there, that's the type of support. And I think that that's what you're seeing from corporations who used to do all the lip service. And I used to call it the tax write-off programs, because that's all they were, is just, check the box, check the box. Things like a tech incubator as an auxiliary to an HBCU campus, that's huge, because that's the underserved. So I think that, and then the next part of it, let's not get our political leaders off the hook. once those initiatives are in place and everything, or in tandem, we go and make sure that we connect our public and private sector together with that. And now you've got a complete slam dunk. So yeah, that's just one real world example of what I feel like businesses have to do moving forward, to really, actually, what do we say, Andre? Walk it like we talk it.
There we go.
One thing I think businesses right now are already 5 years ahead thinking about what's going to happen post-COVID. First of all, the news this week about the vaccine success stories so far are giving us hope that this is shorter lived than we fear. We don't know, but we expect it may be. So they're really reimagining what their workforce and their spaces are going to look like in the future. And they know that they don't have control over all of that, but they have to reimagine it. And younger workers, younger consumers, households are going to react differently in this environment. But for us who care about equity and civil rights and social justice, we're going to figure out how we're going to also embed that into the new ways of doing business, because we can't go back to the way we have been. People are not going to be sitting next to each other in carols necessarily anymore. So we may not have the framework around what workforces used to look like. We're going to be working much more from a distance no matter what. But we have to really deal with the real lives of real people. And workplaces used to be a place where you sat next to those people and you knew them a little better. So it's going to be a little more challenging to do it with a dispersed workforce. But it is going to be a education for leaders about who those consumers in their households are. And they're going to look like the people that came out to vote this year. And those are the ones who are not patient. And I thank God they're not patient.
Well, and Bob, to your point and to Lisa's point, the idea that companies, if they haven't already, are going to be challenged to be more thoughtful in what they do. And Andre, I know that your company helps businesses write their version of a future far better than the one that they were inherited. So when it comes to LGBTQ issues, what areas of support will be businesses asking for the most, do you think?
Yeah, I think in this year in particular, I think getting from the place that we are, and the vaccine news is great, but getting from the place where we are to the other side, which is actually means we have to figure out a plan to get 8 billion people vaccinated in the world, is something I talk about unprecedented, like once again, like something that we've never tried to do. I think this is something that companies really are going to have to step up. Like everybody has to be a part of this, like public-private partnership. This is something where we need to figure out every way that we can, not just to make sure that like the resources are available for the vaccine, but to counter the incredible amount of misinformation we're going to see about that vaccine as soon as it comes on to the scene, and making sure that people have the information they need, not just in general, but for their communities. Like we all know that coronavirus has not hit us all equally. We all know that there's been huge discrepancies and disparities in terms of race. I think that when we think about LGBTQ people, in particular needs, ways that we're going to find our way to the vaccine. I think just thinking about how companies show up in this is going to be a really big conversation in boardrooms across the next few months.
So in terms of that, in terms of, balancing a year that has been, so challenging on so many fronts. And a lot of businesses feel like they're being pulled in a variety of ways, whether we're talking about racial justice, whether we're talking about LGBTQ equity, whether we're talking about health disparities and how to make sure that their customers, but also their employees feel that they are heard and that they have access to these vaccinations. If you were to help a company try to navigate these waters, what would be some of the first steps you would suggest for them to do? Because there is a link between all of it that runs through it in terms of just inequities. And so what would be kind of the first steps that you would suggest for them to do as they start to think about, wow, how do I even begin 2021? Where do I go?
Absolutely. I mean, one thing I always say to folks is like, look in before you look out. So look inside at how your own business operates. Who are you contracting with already? What are the policies and things that you have for your own essential workforce? Like, have you figured out actually how people can take hazard pay or be a part of a conversation about what happens when people get coronavirus and like need to take time off work? Or are you actually hearing their voices inside of your own business even before you then take it to the next level? And the reason I say that is because, I think Lisa made a great point about this. People can say, oh, I want to do good on this thing for like a day and check the box and then be in and out. But I think if you actually look at like where your business is really operating and make some of these changes and alignments in line with your core business, like with what you do every day, it both means the change is going to be more substantial, and it's also going to be something that you can stick with for the longer term. And it's like, everybody doesn't have to do everything. You just have to do the thing that makes sense for you, that has a real impact, and most importantly, that you're going to sustain and actually like put some weight and resources and commitment behind, because that's what I think, your employees want to see. That's what customers want to see, that you're not just like fly by night, but actually really trying to dig in and get some traction on these really difficult issues.
One thing, I'm sorry, go ahead, Lisa. Well, the one thing I want to say is there's a model I'm witnessing in the Biden-Harris transition in which they're saying, I'm reading, and they're saying what I think is a good model of embedding racial justice into every program, everything they're doing. And also, I think in climate and sustainability, they're embedding that into the framework of all of their policies. In other words, we can't afford the silo at all. And businesses are built in a silo fashion. You have a person who's chief diversity officer over there who has to do what Andre is talking about, checking boxes. But that person's also responsible for the culture. And what these companies have to understand is their leadership have to be embracing all of these obligations. They can't imagine a world in which they have only one P&L line, and they've got to make those numbers work. They've got to deliver on racial equity. They've got to deliver on inclusion. They've got to deliver on climate, their response to climate issues within their responsibilities. In other words, they've got to be better at really doing a more holistic approach to all of this kind of work. We're policy and civil rights sort of backgrounds that we have. We see all of these issues bubble up everywhere. Businesses own them too, and they have to be very nimble and very over the horizon looking in terms of embracing all of these subjects, in terms of how they're judged, in terms of how they govern, how they lead. Anyway, that's where I'd start.
Yes. I'm privy to be able to talk to, because of my work with the Black Women's Health Imperative, I get a chance to sit on so many calls with a lot of the marketing departments of these brands. And they all ran to us in March, and they haven't stopped running. But what I do see on the bright side of it is that instead of these cookie cutters, oh, let's just do a webinar, and call it quits. Let's just, we are mandating, first of all, a more robust strategy. So it's coming from us. And I am surprised at the amount of people that are doing, it's coming from them as well, right? So we just amazing partnerships with, large brands like Bumble, on the women's side, Lululemon, that's big in the apparel industry, reaching out and saying, hey, here's $250,000, there it is. And now let's also talk about how we can partner and do some real things. So it's really been a joy to see. And so we've had to just really, and I think the part of having these coalitions, I think more that you're a part of, Bob, of also extending that to saying, because I know Black Women's Health Imperative is a nonprofit, but even if we had and we're big on policy too, so we're always, involved on that side. But it's like making sure that we, connect the dots of having all of these people, because sometimes there's the coalition aspect of this thing has to be, the part that makes the most sense, because it can't just benefit, the Black Women's Health Imperative or one single entity. It has to be a larger picture. And so you look at what was done in North Carolina when they tried to, do what they did, and they got handed their ass, excuse my language, but they did. And that was through a whole coalition. I don't even know the players that worked, on that, but I think that's where it's at now. But it's a beauty for me to see it internally and to be able to work in that space daily. Yeah.
It's exciting. And I guess one of the questions I have is that, in addition to all the different really pressing issues that have surfaced in 2020, the ability for a company not only to understand that these are multiple issues that have to be acted on now and in concert, but having them understand at what levels of the company we do it at. So for example, there's a number of folks that say, well, I'm going to give X amount of money to you to do this this event or this marketing push, or to help people understand that we really are concerned, but they forget about their boardroom. And when at some point that is going to be a disqualifier for talent, when they say, well, let me take a look at your board. I want to physically look at what your board looks like. And it's going to be a disqualifier. And I don't know that they're understanding, or I'm not sure all of them understand, that this has to be worked on multiple levels. And so if you were to give advice to a company about not only, hey, you need to work on all these issues in tandem, but you also need to start at various levels of the company, what would be some of the advice you would give about starting at different levels? So at a board level, mid-level, and frontline, what do you do to make sure folks understand internally, to Andre's point, and externally, that things are really changing?
Well, the one thing that I would give them is this hope. At the beginning of the Trump administration, I was working with actually at least one CEO and another one I talked to about this. They were invited to those early meetings at the White House among CEOs sitting down with the president, until they realized that they were wallpaper, that they were there for public relations reasons. They didn't have any advice to give, nor were they even solicited for advice. They were there as a backdrop to try to present this myth, this Potemkin village of business support for their initiatives. And so they began to realize that they were being used that way. But at the beginning, I thought all of us would feel the same way. It's better to be in the room than not in the room. It's better to be able to know what's going on than to miss out. Well, what's the sea change going on for at least that level for CEOs? They have a partner finally. They've got an administration coming in January that is going to need them. And so they're going to be double time busy, not just managing down, but managing up. And I think for them, they're going to give us principled and I hope morally grounded vision for what the private and public sectors can do. We have huge lifts to do in rebuilding and reopening the economy. And we want to rebuild and reopen on a social justice platform. And if you're going to do that, you're going to do it in the right way. And I think their voice in that room at that time is going to be very powerful. For 4 years, we've been looking to the CEOs and other leaders outside of Washington to give us a moral compass. Now we have a moral compass that we can work with, and we don't have to feel alone. And that's a powerful change. I feel a lot healthier, that our economy is going to be healthier having that begin. Anyway, that's one point of view.
Yeah, I also think that, when it comes to what leaders can do, I would think about it. What I often ask people to do is to think about solving these kinds of challenges in the same way they approach other business problems. So people who are entrepreneurs, who are innovative, you know, people have adjusted to COVID. I don't know if you've been to New York, probably not, but you know, suddenly like overnight, it's like all the restaurants are in the street and there's like, they've built up beautiful seating and like overhangs. And it's like, how did this happen? People just got innovative. They figured it out to be able to survive. And so I think if you feel like this is really actually essential to your business, then you figure it out. You like bring in some partners, you get some good ideas. Maybe you need to add 3 board seats to actually be able to start to get to the kind of diversity you need faster, as opposed to just rolling off the people that you've got there. And so I think that's one thing I always try to just encourage people to get into a different mindset. Not that this is like a bunch of barriers or boxes to check off, but this is like the same way that you sort of drive and grow your business in general. That's how you should drive and grow and improve your ability to like ground yourself in racial equity and gender equity, to make an inclusive workplace. It's not just something you're gonna like get done with and move on, but it's like a way of doing business. And the businesses that do this well get rewarded. They really, really do get rewarded for making that investment time and time again.
Absolutely.
You're muted. Somebody said to me a little while ago, they said the headline of 2020 is "You're on mute."
Exactly. Exactly. It's so true. It's so true. Well, I was going to ask you, Bob, you know, you've helped companies navigate changing political climates. And you talked a little about their role in being able to influence potentially this new administration, and that they're going to be potentially asked by this president to provide their thoughts. And what are your thoughts on the role that they could play in utilizing their influence to drive change? What would be some of the things that you think businesses need to be doing, and things they need to be sharing and telling to this new administration to hopefully be able to help us move the dial?
Here, let me give you the bad news first. The bad news is this election looks to a lot of them and to many others as a stasis. It wasn't a change election. There were some incredibly important outcomes, like the White House, for God's sakes, and also the number of LGBTQ elected officials boomed. We did a lot in terms of women, people of color, LGBTQ leadership. So I feel very good because that's pretty organic and that's going to matter. But if you look at the division politically in the nation, we didn't move the needle very much. It was a very closely, we know it's still contested election. It's very contested. But their urgency at the moment is this winter, at the moment. They've got to put some money in this economy to keep people hope alive. There are people on the margins, people of color who are living at highest risk of COVID infection are going to be paying a very heavy price, a humanitarian price. They're going to be at risk in a lot of cities. And I think that their first ask of this administration is get to the ability, I don't know how we get there, is we got to put money back in the economy. We didn't get a stimulus bill passed, but they're going to see that as a survival issue, I think, for a lot of us in the next 6 months.
So go ahead, Lisa.
I would say that what ended up happening too, and it was interesting that you just mentioned what happened in New York with the restaurants, right, Andre? I just today, when I was out, I heard on NPR the State of the Union of the restaurants in America. And this woman was a restaurateur of a popular spot in New York. Dirty, I forgot the name of the restaurant, but the significance is that she and some of the other restaurants got together and made a huge coalition. Okay, and it's for small businesses, and it passed the House. It's for specifically for restaurants, excuse me. And what she was saying was that wonderful change and shift and pivot, Andre, that you recognized was a gift and a curse, because it kept them able to work, to have a space that was open usually she said, I think like 25 to 50%, right, of capacity or business, what they were doing originally. But she said that the biggest problem is now New York City is saying, hey, you guys have to amend these patios you've created because the snow trucks are about to come and you have to give clearance. And she's like, we can't do that. You know, we don't even have the money to do what we did the first time. And so I'm saying all of that to say that the new administration is going to be tasked with, you know, how do they figure out so many of these lingering problems that are a result of people just trying to get by until, you know, we really figured it out, because they got the bailout, but the bailout just wasn't simply enough. And she was emphatic in saying that if this next stimulus package does not come to fruition, that none of them, she said, I want to say she was as high as like 80% of these restaurants will just simply won't be here anymore. And that is a complete change in America and what the American landscape looks like if the hospitality industry is gutted to that degree. So I think we're seeing it as almost like things are, you know, like we said, the vaccine's coming, things are getting better, but the infrastructure that the Biden administration has to deal with now, it's, I tell you, it reminds me of when Obama got in. I said, boy, these guys can't catch a break.
No, right?
I'll always remember the headline on The Onion when Obama got elected: "Black man gets worst job in America." I think now we've got like black woman gets second worst job in America.
Yeah, right.
So it's a tough moment, and I think it's such a great point because it really just underscores, and I think, you know, Bob, you're hitting this point as well, like how like the relationship between companies and a government that's actually functioning, like actually like doing its job, really need, these two things need to go together. Like companies have to do their piece and like come up with great ideas and figure out how to make their way through, but also need the help to like make it over these big humps. They need like the right incentives for state governments to also help them get over those humps, and city governments. And so it just feels like that, to me, just feels like such a crucial part of like what happens in this next phase, just trying to reboot something that has worked before, but has really just not worked in the last 4 years in most cases.
Well, and I know that that's something where, you know, with the Out Georgia Business Alliance, who's also a supporter of this work and these conversations, they are that group. A lot of them are small business. I know you're all small business owners as well. And so how do we, beyond the clout that some of these Fortune 1000, Fortune 500 companies have, you know, Lisa, to your point, it sounds like a lot of restaurateurs in New York, you know, joined forces to have a bigger voice. Is that something that we see, in your opinion, going to be happening more in order to have a seat at that table, to Bob's point?
I think it's paramount. And the thing that you're seeing is that there is a degree of COVID that helps that, right? There's a degree of COVID that has had to bring people in other sectors together. And so I think I was just on a call last night on the transition team for the Fulton County Sheriff. And I was amazed at the plans for just kind of this cooperative environment. And a lot of it stemmed from COVID, you know, and people needing to be a lot more cooperative, and some of the problems that we've had. And it's like, wait a minute, the north side of town doesn't talk to the south side of town. Okay, why? Why do those business leaders not talk to each other as much? And what can they learn from each other? So I was really encouraged by, you know, just that one phone call of that one meeting of just being like, okay, I see how these dots can continue to connect. So in a sense, COVID has hurt us and helped us at the same time. Yeah.
Sure. Well, a question I have to your point about, you know, Atlanta is that, and in Georgia in particular, so Georgia is now seen as this blue state in a sea of red states. How do companies leverage, especially those that are here based in Georgia, how should companies, or should they leverage that new identity?
Is it a new identity? You know, you got to be careful about that, because I don't want to give us a false sense of anything. That's just the reality there. If you look at even our congressional situation right now, and look at certain states, you know, Trump lost, but we lost congressional seats, right? We still do not know what's going to happen on January 5th. Prayerfully, you know, it'll go our way. But if it doesn't, then, you know, how much did Georgia really change? Or were we just tired of a tyrant and a bad guy in the White House? You know, because that's not a shift. That's just a bit of humanity saying, hey, we're sick of this guy. We want to do things a little bit more rationally and feel a little safer. So I think we're a long way from having a Georgia mandate in that sense of us truly being blue. So I almost think that, you know, corporations, I don't think there's going to be a big drastic shift in the way corporations really move. I think they are going to see that the Atlanta Irby epicenter is what it is. It has value. We've always known it had value. But you may see a little bit more outreach and should see a little bit more outreach to underserved communities. But we still got to look at these numbers to see even how much they impacted, you know, this election as well. I mean, I think the writing is kind of on the wall, but when we really see it, you know, we'll be able to gauge a lot better. So yeah, I don't know. This is going to be, Andre, you may be better equipped and Bob to talk about what.
Well, you know, one of the examples I would use, and Ryan and I talk about this, and we've written on this together, in fact, is because I'm in Virginia. I live in Virginia on the edge of Washington. And Virginia, like Georgia, comes from the Old South. But Virginia, the formula that worked in Virginia was business-minded Democrats. You know, they really had a reputation for being business-centered. The Terry McAuliffes. We have not elected a statewide Republican in 10 years. And we may not for years to come. We just have made it into a blue state. But I think Georgia is turning the corner. It's maybe a little bit more ambitious than you're thinking, Ryan. They're not at that place yet. But again, we can have both things. We can have the economic story. In fact, the success stories you've had in Georgia have been when businesses have objected to discriminatory laws and practices. And they see that as economic roadkill. And so the more and more we continue to build on that, talk about jobs. Also, we have this incredible, you have a great mayor, a woman of color in Atlanta. You have one in Chicago, a lesbian. You have one here in DC. These women they've got a tough job, but I'll tell you one, who better than a woman of color to be able to bridge so many different communities with so much authenticity.
Yes.
And I find that breathtaking because they've got to do heavy lifting with a lot of white guys with big arms. And they also got to be real in the hood. They've got to talk to their friends and neighbors and family and not lose who they are. And that's a big lift.
Absolutely.
I think it's such a great point. And I think there's I think it will be really interesting to see. The thing that's really interesting to me about Georgia, looking from outside in, is like what's possible when investment happens. And so I think that you do have these like amazing Black women leaders like Stacey Abrams, like the mayor, who like are attracting, because of their talent, because of their vision, more resources, more people are coming to the table to actually like help them do the thing that they know how to do if they have the resources to do it. So to me, the big question on like, does it become permanently blue? I think like there's more than enough kind of creativity and talent and commitment. It's just like, can we stay focused on that? Can we keep the resources moving in the right direction when we see that, you know, a state like Georgia, even in just like a one presidential year cycle, like in one 4-year cycle, like how much can change and how much is possible with, you know, even not as much investment as it probably deserved.
Yeah, if you look at Hillary lost by over 200 and maybe 10,000 votes, right? Stacey was in like the somewhere over 60,000. And so now you've seen, you know, this. So, I mean, it's definitely encouraging, especially at that level. we've just got to figure out a way to get it right on the state level. We just have to. And
Well, the answer to that is always going to be the same, is that we control the state, and we then can put together laws and practices that are actually democratic.
yeah,
I mean, so that everybody's vote, and this is Stacey's gift to America, is telling everybody your vote matters. And to me, that is so basic. To me, that's as basic as what Dr. King tried to say, is this notion that you own that. That's your ownership. You have that right. And but until we get in, and we have the Secretary of State offices in all these states, and we have the elections commissioners in all these states, and we have some maybe federalizing of standards, just federalizing of the standards by which votes are taken in and
oh,
counted.
yeah,
So that we have a fair,
yes,
so that people can believe it's fair too. They can just trust it. And we'll always have the crazy side telling us it's unfair if they lose. We'll always see that.
I read an amazing op-ed from Jeb Bush, and he really talked about, you know, he was like, I was the brunt of every joke in the year 2000, and they took a deep dive. And one thing, you might not have liked the outcome in Florida this year, but you did not hear of any foolishness out of Florida on any side. And it's because they kind of have gotten that election. And he broke it down as to the many things that they did over, you know, a few years to try to get that system right. And that's what he was talking about, you know, kind of a more federally mandated system for elections. It's necessary, but you know, I hope it's something that we can address, and that the new administration may be thinking about moving ahead.
We hope. Yeah.
Well, I was going to mention that in exit polls, it's become fairly clear that the Atlanta and Atlanta suburbs, Democrats in those areas are what help flip the state. And so I guess the question I have is, you know, how do businesses utilize this information, or should they, when it comes to local issues, to kind of piggyback off the conversation we've been having about, you know, the state level, the local level, with companies that are in these areas? What should they do? How should they leverage this information?
Man. um, I'm drawing a blank right this second, but we know that Atlanta has attracted more than its share of Fortune 500 companies over the years. I think what we're going to continue to see is that growth. I don't think we're gonna, you know, slow down. If anything, right now will be, if we can get our other issues under control, which, you know, so it's like we're one of those cities where it's like 2 steps ahead and then 2 steps back, kind of. And so this notion, we've got to get the safety, you know, situation under control. You know, we've got to make all of our residents feel safe and comfortable here. But if we can get this party town atmosphere under control, I think that'll help us moving forward with, you know, what's already been. I mean, it's the economic investment through corporations in Atlanta is through the roof. I mean, I don't think, I have not heard of us having as big of a hit, you know, fiscally as, you know, obviously, you know, most of this country did. And that's just a testimony to the work that was put in to build upon corporate in Atlanta. So I think it's going to continue to build. But how do they leverage this new, you know, blue wave? Atlanta, you almost felt like, you know, for me as from the outside looking in, I always feel like, you know, our governor is beholden a bit to Atlanta. A little bit. It always feels like you have to go through Atlanta anyway to make, you know, things work. And so I definitely, and I've seen Keisha cooperate, you know, with Kemp on a lot of things. And so I think that's going to continue. So, you know, I don't know. Outside of that, you know, I don't know.
Well, one
Sure.
thing, Ryan. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Andre. You go ahead.
I was just going to say, just kind of piggybacking off of that, I think maybe it's less like not, it's like hard to say, but in part because I think that there's a lot of lessons to be learned. And like the trick of the blue wave is that it's many shades of blue. And I think that to me is really, really an important point for people looking at a place like a region like Atlanta and the area around it, is like, there's a big difference between that, like, 18-year-old voter who showed up for the first time, who voted, Democrat for president and, didn't vote at all down the ballot. And the person who is like in the suburbs, who's, in their 40s with kids, who voted for Biden, in the way Lisa was saying, because they're like, this is kind of self-preservation and a sanity check, but then voted red all the way down the rest of the ticket. And actually really trying to understand what are those different motivations actually? What are the different stories that people are in around that? I think the more that we kind of dig into those pieces, we actually start to understand the really diverse profiles. Even when you're talking about Black people or even young Black people or LGBT Black people, there's still, even within that, are these kind of shades of gray and nuances. So I think being able to really dig into that, and some of these are questions that can't be answered, but some of them can be, and to the extent that we can as businesses, I think it makes us better at doing what we do.
Well, the one thing that we have to talk about in terms of suburban growth specifically is, if you think of Florida's growth, if you defined it, you define it largely as white people moving south to retire. That's what Florida's gravitational pull has always been. And I don't see a big change in that. If you look at the villages, outside Fort Lauderdale, there is a lot of wealth and voter power in that older cohort. But that's not suburban growth in Atlanta. That's not suburban growth in Chicago or other places. Suburban growth in those cities is based on immigration into those regions, but it's from all over, and it's younger, it's Blacker, it's more immigrant, it's far more diverse. It's not old white people coming to retire. And so that's the key for these businesses, because they're really getting talent in its richness and diversity, and it looks more like America. Actually, it looks more like the world. If you're hiring in suburban Atlanta, you get a rich assembly of different kinds of people. So that is the most important thing for the businesses to know, is that they have a pool that looks as good as they're going to probably need to actually achieve what they do. The customers they serve are going to look like them. The globe that they're going to try to deliver to is going to look like them. And there are going to be a lot more women leaders emerging out of that for management roles. And, because they're not staying home necessarily just as head of the household raising kids. They're really part of growing business. So the Atlanta story, I think, is a very exciting story. And there are a lot of other cities which they had that problem, that they could have such a rich, diverse suburban possibilities. And that's why the Trump strategy to play to fears of white suburban women. I thought, who is he talking to? First of all, those women don't listen to that racist rant. And second, they're more likely to have neighbors that look, different and they're close to. So he just was like talking out of the 1950s, as far as I could tell.
Well, I wanted to put a finer point on this too. I know we've discussed very high level and we've gone into some detail, but as we've discussed, business leaders have for years often been out front on LGBTQ issues. So going forward into 2021, what must be part of their public agenda to support LGBTQ people?
Well, I'll give you a federal point of view, and I don't want to use all the oxygen on the conversation, but the Bostock decision was so important to all of us. We know that, but it didn't lend itself to non-discrimination in all aspects of our lives: adoption, education, healthcare, services of all kinds. So we have to have a federal law, clearly, but we're up against so-called religious freedom opposition. And that's the place we're at the moment with this reconstituted Supreme Court. We had the Fulton versus City of Philadelphia arguments last week. That's going to come to a head. So we want business leaders to join with us on defending and promoting non-discrimination in all its aspects, and not building out a whole lot of carve-outs for religious exemption. That's just going to be a frontier where I think we're going to rely on their help, not just on Congress, but we're going to do it on cities and states around the country.
Mhm. Thank you, Bob.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would also add, one thing at the most basic level, I think that, making sure that, companies are also using their their platforms to make sure that we don't have repeals of fundamental rights that we already have won. I mean, to me, this also seems really important. Like, even if you're not organizing yourself around a push for what we need next, which we all should be, to Bob's point, like actually just making sure that we're raising our voices to say, actually, there is a consensus across government, state governments, across national leaders, across business leaders, that there are certain things that we're not going to roll back. We're not rolling back marriage equality. We're not doing that. Like, that's not, it just feels crazy to even be talking about it. And so I think it's really important actually for the business community to show up on those kind of issues, because it changes the actual terms of the debate and whether there's a debate at all in some cases. So I think I'm not taking for granted just that kind of defending the things that we've won across these last few years.
I think also, to piggyback on something you said, Andre, about working from within, right, earlier. I think that one thing that Black Lives Matter, and unfortunately also what was happening with the trans community this year, and the increase in trans murders, I think that I have a friend, my partner actually works for a hotel chain, and she heard messaging that she had never heard before, letting their employees tell the stories of how they felt in the corporate culture, and people having the guts to actually stand up and say how they felt as a Black man at this corporation, in a webinar, an internal webinar like this. And she said she was so moved by it. And this one man, she said, was just crying tears, to explain what it felt like being a Black man in corporate America. And someone else talked about, what it was like, and how long it took him to come out. And he had been with the company for 20 years and all of this. So there is a huge bright side to, this dialogue, this discourse. And it's beautiful. And I love what you said. It does have to start from within on these companies, letting people have the freedom to express themselves, because maybe they'll get a gut check that they can actually, help to remedy a bit.
So last question for each of you. This is somewhat connected, but how are each of you finding time for self-care in this crazy time? Like, what are y'all doing? Are you reading books, or what are you doing?
You guys start.
I'm currently...
Don't tell me you're not doing it, Bob.
No, I tried. I'm doing one thing that people might consider high risk. I'm going to the gym every day. But we have a gym that I think has the rules down. I've been doing it for 4 months, and I find it essential. Yeah. But I love reading, and I've been reading like a crazy man. A lot of great books, so I love that.
That's good.
What about you guys?
I'm a meditator. I meditate daily, and that's that theme of going within first before I can pour out into others. And a lot of what we have to do daily is pour out into others, because now we're having to do, more of these, calls and things that we didn't, I think there's more meetings because of the lack of interaction, but it places an undue burden on us. And so we have to manage how all of this, this comes at us. And I think that for me, I just have to center myself constantly. And so I use meditation as a way of life at this point. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I think that's similar for me. I think a big thing is like recognizing that once we got into this year, by the time we were in March, it was like, oh, this is going to be a year. There's a lot going on. I think we could all feel it early on, especially once COVID came. So I think I've been trying just to make really intentional decisions about when it is going to be intense and then also letting it dial back. And so that sense of just like, yes, there are going to be intense moments, but once I get into that, doesn't mean I have to just stay there. I can actually like make choices about bringing back. And, you know, for a person running a team, also I can bring the team back from those really intense moments. And when that doesn't work, I'm watching a lot of episodes of The Crown right now.
Oh, yes.
Also, that's also getting me together up here.
I have to say that I'm doing similar things. So I also like to draw, but it's really helpful to just kind of allow yourself to go somewhere different for a while and just be creative.
Have you been doing the drawings of your home?
No, these are just random drawings that I
Oh,
think of. I don't know. I sometimes
just come
post
to
them on
mind.
Instagram. But yeah, I just like to be creative and have fun. But I cannot thank you all enough, Bob, Lisa, Andre. You all are just superb, and I appreciate you all being on the call today. And I hope that the viewers and the folks who are going to view this later on will get a lot out of this in terms of where to go from here in 2021. But I wanted to say again, thank you so much. Thank you to Delta Airlines. And to all of you, I appreciate you being willing to spend some time with me and the folks that really care about these issues.
Thank
In
you.
love and friendship. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.